Hello and welcome everyone to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show, number 111, if such figures are to be believed, which I'm not entirely sure they are. I'm going to pause a second. Oh, I see that we are actually now on Vaughan, broadcasting live. Just a quick test, given our shabby history, can I just ask, can I be heard?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not asking you. I'm asking the people on. Yes, yes. I've got one button clicked correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're listening to the live feed too, GPR. We can hear it too on the show. We can watch it on and hear it on live on Vaughn.
Oh, there
So
we go. Well, it's a huge pleasure to welcome the regular Aussie,
cheers.
Ilana, Tiger Lily. Welcome to the show. I know that you've been on it before, but welcome for second, maybe third time. But our special guest, a first timer, Francis Roy. Welcome to the show, everyone.
G'day.
Francis, as our special guest, I'm going to kick off with you, if I may. The title of the show has been advertised as Men's Rights Activism, and I believe that you are active in that movement. Would you like to give us a brief introduction about you first, and then we'll do a brief introduction about men's rights activism secondly?
Sure. Well, I'm Francis Roy. I live in Quebec, Canada. I've been involved in the men's movement in general for the last 3-4 years. Searched for it for most of my life, and it's only recently that it's come to the very popular fore. My reasons for getting involved in it are basically my experiences of life history, and I've found that it is a movement that is timely and beneficial for all involved.
Okay. Before we move on to what it is, can I just remind people who are watching, you can message us directly either through the chat on Vaughan TV. If you have a specific question and you want to draw my attention to it, you can send me an IM. Alternatively, I have the Twitter feed open. So if you're into Twitter, I know it's not everyone's favourite cup of tea, but if you're into Twitter, you can send me a tweet and I will see it. I do have that window open. So yeah, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Let's move on then, Francis, if we may. Imagine you're talking to someone that has absolutely no idea what men's rights activism is all about, such as me. I'm pretty ignorant in these things.
Okay.
Paint a picture for us. Tell us what it's all about.
All right, I'll start on a little broader scale. I'll start at the scale of the men's movement in general. The men's movement is men's response to our current environment, to our current legal, cultural, technological environment in general. Within that movement, what we have are men who are realizing, do you know what? The social roles that I would have played as somebody in the bear hunting days, the roles that I would have played in the pioneer days, in the industrial age, have all changed. We now live in a world that's full, warm, and dry for pretty much most everyone in the Western world. And while there are constants throughout the whole thing, there are many conditions that have changed that may or may not be to the advantage of today's man. Men in general have issues, and among some of these issues are legal issues. This is where the men's rights movement come in. Technically speaking, the men's rights movement are men and women, or people who care for men, who address the rights, the legal rights of men. The term is unfortunately also conflated with anyone who advocates for men's issues. It's a catch-all term, and that's a little bit of a linguistic vagary that should be attended to. But when we're talking about men's rights activism, generally speaking, what we're dealing with are those who advocate for men's right under law and for men's proper treatment and culture.
Okay. Before we move on, I just want to address one comment that was posted in the chat, and that is along the lines of, why don't you post a YouTube video a couple of days before you do the show so we all know what's going on and when it's going to be broadcast? I'm sorry. This show has been running for, I think, over 5 years now. It's been every 2 weeks at the same time consistently. And over those 4 or 5 years, we've missed one show. I don't know. Do people really need to be told exactly when the show's going out? I'm not sure. Ilana, I hope you're still with us. Your video seems to be gone for a moment.
I'm here.
Whilst Francis was giving that description, I don't know whether I misread your body language, but you seem to be sort of like questioning what he was saying. Is that correct?
No, no. I was just wanting to hear what like a list of issues are. That
Okay, Francis. a list of
Okay,
issues.
well, I can go there now. If you give me just a second, I got all kind of nervous about the show and started making this giant mind map. So if you see me referring to, if you see me looking in this direction, that's what I'm looking for. Some of the issues that men's rights activists deal with are issues that specifically affect men on all levels: legal, cultural, health, so on and so forth. We have fathers' issues. We have issues related to marriage, divorce, and alimony, reproductive rights, the health of baby infants, circumcision, family issues, legal issues such as violence, false charges, paternity issues, issues having to deal with agreements made before and after marriage. We have one broad general issue, which is essentially the ideal goal is to have a complete impartiality under law, from the legislative to the policy to the procedural level. And one thing that the long-term goal that I would like to see is, as we did earlier when the women's movement was active, I would like for us to do a review from top to bottom of all the laws to verify, to check how they affect men specifically. Does that give us some starting ground? Pardon me?
all the laws? Did you say all the laws? You wanted to look at all the laws to see how they affect men specifically?
Well, what I'd like to do is what I would like to see is a relevant review, a review of all the relevant laws to see how they apply to men equally as they do to women. Sorry if I'm being sort of clumsy-tongued at the moment.
It's okay.
It is. No, actually not. The women's movement was very much like what the original women's movement dealt with law. And then it transformed into the women's liberation movement, where they started addressing women's more personal issues, the more political issues. Well, this is what the men's movement is doing right now. The fact that I might want, let's say, equitable access to my children in no way is a conflict with women wanting equitable access to their children. If I happen to misphrase things, do catch me on this.
Are you making some kind of a distinction between the women's movement and feminism? I think you might be,
Yes.
from the way
Yes,
you're
I am.
phrasing it. Okay,
Yes, I am.
do you want to?
Uh,
What is what is the
well,
distinction you're making?
the distinction is that feminism itself is a political ideology. As a political ideology, it has specific goals and it has root tenets, which may or may not be related to the advocacy for women's interests and for promoting women's point of view. One of the things that it's, I'm sorry, I'm being kind of clumsy-tongued here. Feminism is a political ideology. The women's movement is about women addressing their issues specifically. These issues can be addressed without necessarily referring to the tenets of a political ideology.
Could you say a little more about this ideology as you see it? Because I think most feminists and most men or women who self-identify as feminists would say, well, feminism really is about women's issues. It's about any issue of concern, specifically to women. And so, where is this distinction? How do you carve off feminism from that?
Well, the distinction would be that the political ideology of feminism is based on feminist theory. Feminist theory, like any ideology, must have core tenets. The one core tenet of feminism is that women are oppressed, subordinated, subjected. Now, one can address issues that affect women without coming from the point of view that they are subordinated, oppressed, or subjected. You can simply deal with your issues as such. Feminism is a direct derivative of conflict theory. It's I'm kind of concerned about delving too deeply into politics, into the history of political philosophy. Guide me on this.
Well, I'm not so. I just want to make sure that I and the viewers understand this distinction that Alana was asking about. What is ideological about feminism that isn't ideological about just women's issues, right?
Well, women's issues is specifically just women taking care of each other. Let's say you look at South America. These are women who are concerned about taking care of their children, making sure that the conditions for their children are very safe. If you look at women's issues in the 1960s, a lot of it was about dignity and culture, about the ability to express themselves, about the ability to be self-responsible for taking charge of their lives. None of this requires that you believe that women are oppressed. Just as the men's rights movement does not believe that men are oppressed, we believe we have issues to deal with. We don't start from the point of view of one group is harming another group. One group is a victim, one group is an oppressor. Feminism is, at its core, the idea that men and women are two separate classes that are in conflict, and that this conflict goes all the way back throughout history, and that it has always been so, that women have always been oppressed, always been subjugated. Now, you can approach women's issues without that presupposition.
But Francis, don't people in the men's rights movement do exactly the same thing? I mean, when I hear men's rights, people who call themselves men's rights activists talking, not talking about you necessarily, but I hear words like gynocentrism and misandry and oppression and men's disposability and men being used as tools. I mean, this is all ideology too. It just seems a little unfair to sort of carve it off with feminism and men's and women's issues or whatever you called it, and not do that with men's rights and the men who talk about those things. You know what I mean?
Well, some of those arguments, I will agree, I don't believe, I don't agree with. Now, there are certain facts. One of the things about feminism itself, and I don't want to make this show about feminism, but I know that people are going to be talking about it right up front. They instinctively believe that there's a conflict. There isn't necessarily.
A conflict with what? With men's issues?
Yeah, the average person thinks there's a conflict between men struggling for equality under law and dignity in culture and feminism. If you read feminist theory, I would recommend that anybody do the following search. What is feminist theory? The fundamentals of feminist theory. Feminist Theory 101. Just do this search. You will find that feminism has two self-proclaimed goals. The first is the promotion of women's interests and the promotion of women's point of view, the promotion of the gynocentric point of view. Now, we have had a gynocentric point of view throughout history. We have also simultaneously held an androcentric point of view. As long as there were men, as long as there were women, both points of view have always coexisted. To say that one dominated over another is a little on the parochial side. It is time-based, and it only looks at half of the story. The story that is presented of men's history is from the gynocentric point of view. They will talk about androcentrism, they'll talk about how men did this, how men did that, but
How are
it
you
is
defining how are you defining gynocentrism here? Because yeah, I'm a little confused by how you're using that term.
well, gynocentric is an adjective. It centers on the woman's perspective. Androcentric centers on the male perspective.
Okay, and you're saying from throughout history that we've had a gynocentric point of view?
No, I'm saying that throughout history, men have acted according to their own point of view, and simultaneously, women have acted from their own point of view. Throughout history, men have viewed the world from a man's body, from a man's brain. He has his approaches. Throughout history, women have done the same. While, yes, gynocentrism is an influence that goes all the way back in the past, so is androcentrism, and the two have always been intermingled, balanced, interrelated, interacting.
Could I introduce a little point that's come up in the comments? The viewers who are watching the show live right now, a couple of people have asked, who exactly is Alana? They don't know who Alana is and why she's participating in this conversation. Why is she a guest on the show? Alana, could you introduce yourself? Say a little bit about yourself, maybe, and why you're interested in the show and why you're participating.
Yes, certainly. I'm Ozzy's wife, actually, and I've been interested in in the MRA and feminism for about a year. I've just been sort of studying and paying attention to both sides and taking part in arguments on related to both feminism and the MRA, and that's why I was interested in being on it because it's a subject that interests me.
I
She's
do
also
apologise. I do apologise, Ilana, for not introducing you properly. I just assumed, because I know you so well, that everyone else would know you so as well. I apologise.
That's okay. I've only actually been on the show once, and it was I think a year ago. So, yeah, people might not remember.
Yeah,
she's also
and
my
just
friendly foil.
yeah, it just and in the interest of full disclosure, uh, it was my suggestion that we have Francis on the show. Francis is someone that I've known for, well, literally since before I created my YouTube channel, and right after my very first appearance on the Magic Sandwich Show. He was one of the first people who commented rather favorably, had some nice things to say about me in the comments under that episode of the Magic Sandwich Show. We corresponded a little bit. He encouraged me to actually, maybe make some content, make some videos. He's one of the reasons actually why I actually created my account. So so thank you, Francis, for that. And in the course of that correspondence, we had a number of conversations, and I was interested to discover that he's involved in the men's rights movement, something I knew really very little about. And we had a hangout. Ilana, Francis, and I had I don't know how long it was, a couple of hours long, a hangout on my channel. It's one of the only hangouts I've ever hosted, one of two hangouts I've hosted. It's one of the very first videos in my on my channel where we discussed some of these issues. The whole issue about rape and feminism and rape culture and that's that sort of thing. So that's how I know Francis and how Ilana knows Francis. So we've actually been in dialogue for over a year, although not recently. We haven't really talked about these sorts of things in quite some time. But anyway, I thought it was long overdue that we have him on the show to hear his perspective on it.
I'm just
If
getting
I
back
may,
to. Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
sorry, if I may, I just saw a comment in the chat George St. Astus, Francis Ware recognized that males and females are biologically different, and this may affect how they interact in society. Absolutely. This is the basis of andro and gynocentrism.
I'm still a little perplexed by the way you're using gynocentrism, because the way I understand gynocentrism is or androcentrism, it refers to the dominant or exclusive focus of women in theory or in practice, which I'm getting off Wikipedia right now. So it's not just a woman's point of view and a man's point of view, but a societal point of view is what we're talking about when we usually talk about gynocentrism, right?
That's right. That's part of it. Break it down. What is it? In order for it to be true for society, what does it have to be true for? It has to be true for the individuals. Where does this? What generates an androcentric or a gynocentric point of view, if not humans? Ideas compete. One idea sometimes dominates. Another idea sometimes dominates. Quite frequently, they are always in interaction. The more humans you are, the more humans you have, the larger scale it takes. So it's not exclusively a macro level perspective.
When people talk about gynocentrism, though, in general, they're talking about the fact that all of society is sort of geared towards women's point of view, right? That's usually what's meant in the men's rights community when they talk about gynocentrism, not something that's sort of coexisting at the same time with androcentrism. I don't
and
know.
That's where I differ with some of my fellow men's advocates.
Okay, all right. Okay, it's just a different use of the term, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the ideas that I will be presenting, I want to put this right up front. These are my ideas. It's my way of thinking. I'm very familiar with a lot of the arguments that are made in the men's movement and in the women's movement, and I've sort of had to decide what do I think is really true based on what I can observe in the world. And what I've observed is nothing is ever 100% this or 100% that. And that if I look at history, the history of humankind is interconnected interdependence. If we as a group of people hang out together, we will have people who will have very extreme points of view, and we'll have other people who have very mild points of view. Most of us will clump towards the middle, and this is one of the things that human interaction does. This is why I don't buy into feminism as the ideology, and this is why I spend as much time speaking with and debating with those who are interested in the men's movement, because I don't believe it's either or. My experience in life has never been that life is black and white, but that it's very nuanced, and it's usually some of this, some of that. There are grayscales throughout the whole thing. There is nuance in the real world that pure ideas stemming from our little monkey brains just don't provide. So if I say things that aren't exactly what you've heard, well, it's because they're my thoughts, not everybody else's thoughts.
Okay.
Okay, there's something that bothers me in this, though, Francis. And we've had this discussion before, actually, privately. One of the reasons that I don't self-identify as a feminist, even though I'm an egalitarian, and of course I want to see equal rights and equal opportunity for men and women, a level playing field, a kind of gender-blind culture. I mean, nominally, if you just look at the stated objectives of feminism, you'd say, well, geez, Ozzy, you sound like a feminist, right? But it's because I don't believe in self-identifying or taking on the label of a movement that belongs to a movement based on its stated objectives. I'm interested also in how they identify the problem, how they diagnose the problem, and the policy recommendations that they put forward. Feminism isn't just a state of objectives or state of ideals. It's a whole set of values. It's a whole set of diagnostic and analytical tools and interpretive strategies for identifying what the problem is, where the causes are, and hence where the solutions are, and a set of prescriptions and policy recommendations. Right. And I think, for instance, patriarchy theory is just a pile of twaddle. And I think that the idea that men and women are inextricably locked in a kind of power struggle, and this discourse that you characterize of sort of men as victimizers, women as oppressed, and stuff like that, I think is misbegotten. It's not to say that there's no sexism. It's not to say that there's no discrimination. But this way of diagnosing it seems wrong to me. And because of all that, because I don't think that the diagnostic procedure here is right, and because I don't think the prescriptions consequently are right, I'm not interested in being identified as a feminist, even though I agree with the stated objectives. But with Alana, I see the same kinds of problems, and we've had this discussion before. I see the same kinds of tendencies in the men's rights movement, and so and I can meet a very, very sober feminist who is, I would say, analogous to you, who I think is a very, very sober men's rights activist, right? Someone who seems really, really sober and not beholden to a lot of simplistic us versus them thinking, and out to bash the other sex, and I might think, boy, if all feminists were like you, I would eagerly take on the mantle, because I like the way you think. I like the way you diagnose the problem. I think you have a more subtle, fact-based, empirically based analysis, and consequently, your recommendations are something that I could get behind, even if I'm not entirely convinced. I could at least get behind the movement. But unfortunately, feminism isn't like that. There isn't one feminism. Feminism is a lot of things, and it's a lot of crazy things, unfortunately, right now. And I think the crazy
I would
voices
like
speak
to
the
offer.
loudest. Well, just let me finish the point. So feminism makes a lot of includes a lot of craziness, and there's a lot of crazy, loud voices, and that sort of is off-putting. And I don't want to I don't want to tarnish myself with that, and I don't want to weary myself with that. But this is the problem that I have with the men's rights movement. Is right now it seems a critical mass has happened now. There's a lot of people sort of catching on, who are interested in this, and it seems to be attracting the wrong kind of people. And I think it's attracting the wrong kind of people in part because some of the loudest voices, some of the most influential voices in the movement are extremely strident, and I think reckless in their rhetoric, and not always very empirically minded. People like Paul Elam and John the Other and stuff like that. I mean, these are people that I don't know to what extent you respect them, but I don't think terribly highly of these people, and I find their message, not just their mode of expression, but the content, the substantive content of what they're saying, to be very, very off-putting. Even though I'm sympathetic with a lot of the problems that they identify, that I think are real problems, and so that's the problem I have. So, what would you say to that? To this analogy that I'm making between
Well, you've
why
given
I'm
me
not comfortable with either movement?
you've given me basically 3 points. What you're talking about, and I'm stealing this phrase, is it's the tyranny of the shrill minority on both sides. What you've done is you've presented me with 2 ideas. One, that there are many types of feminism. This is incorrect. 2, that the crazies are that you're turned off by the crazies on both sides, and I think so am I. Uh, Now, because I know that everyone on the panel is an atheist, and I'm an atheist, and we're all familiar with the arguments, I'd like to make an analogy that those within our group will understand. If you're not an atheist, that's okay. See past the style, look into the bones of the argument. Saying that there are many kinds of feminism is a little bit like saying there are many kinds of saying that there are many feminisms is like saying there are many Christianities. There are many sub-branches of Christianity. You have Catholics, Lutherans, Baptists, these, those, and the other. And if you look at feminism, you have radical feminists, Marxist feminists, eco-feminists, so on and so forth. How do you distinguish whether somebody is a Christian to begin with? How do you distinguish whether someone is a feminist to begin with? Well, one really good way of doing it is you look at the broad scope of all the varieties and you find, what do they have in common? What is their root? Upon what presupposition are these ideas based? And I've found that, with the exception of a couple religiously oriented styles of feminism, every feminist theory boils down, is directly an offshoot of conflict theory. It has at its very root that society is in struggle between one class and the other, and that one class is subjugated by another. If you look at the root tenet of Christianity is there is a God. Now, whether you're a Baptist, whether you're a Catholic, whether you're this or that, you will all agree there is a God. If you yank that out of the arguments, suddenly the connection that they have is quite tenuous. Well, the same thing with all the varieties of feminism. They all have one root. How do you know whether someone is a feminist or not? Do they adhere to the fundamental feminist tenets, the fundamental tenets of feminist theory?
Can you say what those are?
Very, very simply, that that women are subjugated and or oppressed. That is the root of it.
I think you'd find a lot of people who associate with feminism that wouldn't say that at all. I mean, most people over a certain age think they're feminists, and they just all they mean by that is that they're in favor of equal rights for women. That's all they mean.
Yeah,
and they're incorrect
Francis,
in doing so.
If I may throw in my tanks worth here, what Ilana just described is how I would describe myself. I would describe myself, and I won't get into a conversation with Ozzy about this at the moment, but I would describe myself as a feminist, and by that I mean that I think that I believe in that there should be equal rights for men and women, and I don't take it further than that. So how would you address my interpretation or my definition of feminism?
I would say that you are conflating you are conflating it for classical liberalism. Classical liberalism has as its core, as one of its many beliefs. We all live under a classical liberal system in the West, and amongst those beliefs, coming out of the feudal times, is that all human beings have an equivalent social status. None are higher or lower than the other. All human beings are of equivalent moral value. Since these two are the case, we have developed a system to interact peacefully so that our justice system, yeah, that's kind of noisy. We've developed a justice system which is based upon, as theoretically, impartiality and fairness, regardless of who the individual is, regardless of what their attributes are. Men and women are people being equal. This is classical liberalism. The fact that
just pausing there, would you criticize my stance then?
Give me a moment to formulate my thoughts on this. Yes, yeah. I would.
Okay.
But give me a.
That's fine. That's fine. Take as long as you want. I love to be challenged. So
my criticism is that you're conflating classical liberalism, and most people who say, "Look, we just believe that men and women should be treated impartially under law, and with fairness and kindness in culture." This is not feminism. This is classical liberalism. The fact that feminists...
If I accept that I'm a classical liberalist as opposed to a feminist...
Or a classical liberal, I'm sorry, yeah.
Do you have criticisms with me holding that position?
No. No. In fact, you know, the men's movement is about impartial treatment under law and dignity in culture. So I have no problem with this. Are you asking me whether I have a problem with women or whether the men's movement has a problem with women specifically? I've heard charges of men's activists being misogynist, of being supremacists. Although there are the individuals who at that stage in life may think and speak that way, generally speaking, in principle, this is not what the men's movement is about. It is about impartiality under law and dignity in culture. That is the le cadre, the frame of the whole thing.
You seem to be. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to sort of frame something myself here. Francis has been talking about conflict theory, and right now he's talking about a distinction between classical liberalism and feminism. Classical liberalism is committed to egalitarianism. Okay, and so DPR, I would say you and I are both egalitarians with respect to gender relations, right? Uh, but feminism, I think, is more than just a commitment to egalitarianism. In fact, some people would allege that feminism, because it is principally concerned with the interests of women, can actually depart from the principle of commitment to egalitarianism. And some people might even say the same thing about the men's movement, that the men's movement, to the extent that it's concerned with the interests of men and advocating for the interests of men, at least some strains of it, if not all of it, can be departing from a commitment to egalitarianism. So I think DPR, you and I could easily be seen as classical liberals with a commitment to egalitarianism, but that doesn't necessarily make us feminists. Just because feminism self-identifies as an egalitarian movement doesn't mean that that's all that it is. In other words, perhaps all feminists are egalitarians, hypothetically, but it doesn't follow that everyone who's an egalitarian is a feminist. Right? If feminism is nothing but egalitarianism, then of course then I'm a feminist. But of course, if the men's rights movement is committed to egalitarianism, and I'm an egalitarian, and all there is to the men's movement is egalitarianism, then I am both a men's rights activist and I'm a feminist. Well, how about that? So this is the problem. It seems to me that we can't define these things this way. And with respect to conflict theory that Francis was talking about, the idea of conflict theory, for those who aren't familiar, is it's sort of an idea that's sort of based strongly in Marxist thought. In Marxist thought, the way the analysis of social injustice in the world is understood in terms of class struggle. That people at different economic classes and strata are locked in struggle intrinsically by virtue of where they are in the economic system. Their interests are different. The interests of the capitalist, the captain of industry, are necessarily different than the interests of the wage, the so-called wage slave, the person who just works paycheck to paycheck to get by. Their interests are different. One person is prostituting his labor to the other person. The other person is buying the other person's labor for as cheaply as they can. And this is not an equitable relationship. And consequently, they are necessarily locked in class struggle. This is necessarily a conflict. Now, that's according to Marxist theory. Now, of course, there are political theories that would say, no, Marxism has it wrong. This is the wrong diagnosis, and consequently, its suggestions, its prescriptions for how to remedy the situation are not likely to be right. And Francis's point, if I understand him correctly, is that feminism has been very much historically been informed by this kind of Marxist idea of struggle. It's not class struggle; it's gender struggle. The idea is that men and women, perhaps by nature or perhaps simply by virtue of traditional practices, are locked in struggle. Their interests are different, and consequently, you have one group that oppresses another, and men are out to preserve their interests, women are out to preserve their interests, and historically one has had more power over the other. And consequently, women's efforts at emancipation or achieving social justice have to come at the expense of privileges that men have enjoyed, and so men fight it tooth and nail. Right? They fight it as a class, whether they realize it or not. So that's the idea of conflict theory that informs feminism. And I think that's right. I think that feminism is in fact very much infected with this idea of class struggle. It doesn't just look at inequality and discrimination and sexism as social evils, but that this is almost always a matter of a kind of hatred of women by men, of men either consciously or unconsciously striving to protect their interests, as opposed to something that's sort of systematic, and we're sort of all bumbling through this together and sort of beholden to certain practices and habits. So there are ways of analyzing the problem of social injustice between the sexes and discrimination and inequality that don't presuppose that we're locked in conflict based on our sex or our gender. I hope that helps.
That is exactly right. Can I hire you to be my mouthpiece?
Where do you see the bill?
The only concern I have, though, is it feels like you're carving off off of feminism all of the sort of reasonable and rational people, and then you're carving off of the MRA all the irrational, bad, ideologically
No,
bound
no.
people. And it feels that way. You know, it feels like you're sort of rescuing one and sort of, you know, leaving the other one to sort of flounder in the worst of their, you know, soup, whatever.
Well, it's. I know your question. The issue is that we haven't really spoken much about the men's movement. Right now, what we are doing is we're trying to define the men's movement in relation to the women's movement. And while there is a relationship, the men's movement stands on its own. Now, we needed to discuss feminism a little bit because these are the initial objections that people bring up. They believe that this thing called feminism is purely about a form of egalitarianism between men and women. But when you learn about feminist theory, you discover that this is not the case. Now, I've addressed that part. I have not, in every group, in women's groups, in feminist groups, in men's groups, you will find a variety of people who are very articulate, who speak well, who are thoughtful, who are sober. And then you find people who are still caught in that sense of personal angst, of rage, of whatever it is that we human beings feel in a society, and haven't yet learned to think through the issues. They haven't looked at the underpinnings, the thought underpinnings of them. And so when they express themselves quite poorly. What is very frequent in human societies is that you'll find that there are a dozen people who speak very, very well on an issue, and everybody says, well, what that person said, that's the truth. And so I will repeat their arguments without actually having thought them through. This happens on all sides. Now, when I'm talking about how do you believe that I have, despite the fact that we've not spoken a lot about it, how do you believe that I am somehow excusing one part of the men's movement? Sorry, let me go back. I agree, and 99.99%, I believe, of people involved in the general men's movement, the men's rights activists, the MGTOW, whatever groups you want to make, that these people agree that what we want is a healthy, balanced society where everyone is treated impartially and with dignity. I'll keep harping on this theme because the sober people all have this in common. We want impartiality under law. We want dignity in culture. There are aspects of the women's movement that are not touched by feminist theory. And as Ozzy pointed out, they're very sober people. The only reason they call themselves feminists is because they've heard it so many times that feminism is this, without actually delving into it. And so when they say I'm a feminist, what they really mean is I'm some form of egalitarian. And what they really mean behind this is I want people to be treated impartially and fairly. I'm all for that, and I support people, whether they be men or women, who address women's genuine issues. The same thing with men.
Don't you think that 90...
You don't class yourself as an egalitarianist.
I don't actually. Aaron Raw kind of changed my mind on that. The reason I don't use the word egalitarian, he pointed out, is that one implication of the term egalitarian is that it can imply a form of socialism. And it's just the confusion of associating oneself with an ism. That's why I refer to myself as a men's advocate. It is an action that I take. When you ask me, what am I will not give you a philosophical position. I will tell you that I attempt to be fair and impartial. I happen to be focused on men's health, on men's rights, on men's dignity, on men's being treated fairly in culture. This is my area of interest. It is a subset of impartiality under law and dignity in culture.
I interrupted Ilana. I'm sorry. Do go on.
I'm trying to remember what I was going to say.
Whilst you're trying to remember, can I just say that I've got at least one contact request. If I open it up, it was going to shatter the video screen. But what I'll do is towards the end, if anyone else wants to send a contact request to talk about this during the last half hour of the show, I'll get you all involved. So don't worry. So if you want to communicate directly with us by appearing on the show, just send a Skype contact request to us, and we'll get you on in the last half hour. Sorry, Ilana, has that given you enough time to...
It's okay, yeah. Yes, I remember. Okay, so again, when you say 99% of MGTOWs and MRAs would say that they favor equal rights between men and women, I think this probably the same thing would be true if you ask 99% of people who call themselves feminists.
I agree.
Now, but the issue is when you look at MRAs, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is MRAs have a terrible reputation, right? And part of the reason why they have such a bad reputation is because of all of the ideology that is brought to the table when people are talking to them. Things like misandry and men as tools and hypergamy and I mean, the list goes on, right? Most people that you meet who are MRAs, who call themselves MRAs, are bringing to the table a pile of arguments that are not really much well, I'm going to say they're not any better than feminist arguments about patriarchy and rape culture. So I guess, do you see what I'm saying when I say that I feel that there's something a little bit unfair about sort of not addressing that part of the MRA?
Well, then let's discuss some of these parts. Remember, I will hearken back to when I was talking about the difference between those who are articulate, those who aren't, those who've thought things through carefully, and those who've just borrowed ideas by other people because they resonate with it emotionally. Are there any arguments that men's rights activists, advocates, people in the men's movement in general make that you have a disagreement with? And let's talk about them. You brought up hypergamy.
Let's do that rather than talk about the ideologies and whatever.
I think we've set a framework.
Let's take a specific, and I'll leave it for you, Francis, to come up with what's your top issue that you sort of like consider is the most important, the one that you advocate the most. Tell us about that.
Well, the one that to me would be most important is the issue of reproductive rights and technologies for men. Men's ability to control their fertility. One of the greatest troubles that we have in the year 2015 in our technologically inclined culture is that men are still expected to operate by the rules that applied in the 1500s and even in prehistoric times. There was a time when the value that men brought was their muscle, was their brawn. There was a time when the value that women brought to our species, to our tribe, that we just instinctively felt was reproductive power. So we had labor and we had war, we had defense, and we had reproduction and family. Now, all of these instincts that are, as Ozzy would say, pickled into us, were very effective at taking our species into the future, and here we are now. But we now live in a different context. We now live in a different environment. We are now in a position where our lives last much longer. Muscle power is replaced by electricity and petroleum. It's extremely rare that you hear about people being mauled by a bear in downtown New York. So our conditions have changed, but our instincts haven't necessarily. And despite the fact that we can think there is the weight and momentum of culture that just keeps pushing things forward. The men's movement is now starting to come about because we are recognizing that times have changed, that men that men and women no longer need to adhere to the social roles and expectations that applied 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And one of the central issues is that of our ability to control our fertility, to choose whether or not to become a parent, to choose whether or not that we want to accept the obligations and thus the and thus the roles and the duties that accompany these obligations. Women have the ability to control their fertility through some 14 discrete means, whereas men still have two. This is a technological issue. In law, we are still treated as though a man's role is to provide for a woman and children, that pregnancy is the man's fault, but all the rights, generally speaking, in law, support the parent, the primary parent, and it is frequently assumed that this primary parent will be the female. As a judge said some years ago, I don't remember the judge's name, he says, when I watch a calf, I see him following the cow, not the bull. What the judge didn't keep in mind is that the calf grows up and becomes independent of the mother and then starts associating with the other of its own sex. So what I would like to see is technologically that we have means to control our fertility. Under law, what I would like to see are that fathers have equal access to their children, that we have the ability, first of all, to determine paternity. One of the things that I'd like to see, and the libertarians just despise me for this, but I would like to see, at the time of a child's birth, that a paternity test be done. The woman will be asked, can you name the father? And if she can, a paternity test is done. At this point, the man says, okay, well...
Just hang on. If I just pause you there briefly, if I may, because that seems to me to be a secondary issue. The first issue seems to be in relation to controlling the propensity to create children. Perhaps not
your question is?
a man does have that ability, does he not?
A man's ability to not procreate, if he is to engage with society in the same way that women do, is limited technologically. We have three options: abstinence, the condom, or pulling out. The first, abstinence...
You've got a fourth one as well, haven't you? You can take
Which one's that?
You can take the snip.
Or vasectomy, that's exactly right. So there are advantages and disadvantages.
I think that's a fairly broad options available to a man, and you're saying that you have a problem because women have more abilities to...
No, what I'm saying is, no, I'm not saying that I have a problem that women have more options. What I'm saying is that I would like men to have more options.
Well, how many more options do you physically consider are available?
Well, that are available, not as many, and that is part of the technological issues we're dealing with. Let's look at abstinence. Do we know whether abstinence works? Absolutely, abstinence works. How many people in real life are genuinely abstinent? What have we learned from abstinence-only courses given by religious schools in the States? It tends not to work on the young. We can look at the pull-out method, which is, it's... I think I read that it was something like 47% effective over a year. It's not a reliable method. We have condoms. Condoms are 95% effective, but many partners, male and female, prefer not to have condoms. Then we have vasectomies, which are essentially irrevocable. Some can be reversed, but there's no you're taking a very great chance that if you wanted to protect yourself in your 20s but wanted to have children in your 30s, well, if you get yourself snipped, it may be irrevocable, and you may be cutting off one option of your life to choose to be a father. And
Can I again just pause you there? I'm really sorry to do so, but it seems to me that you're being critical of the fact of biological facts.
I'm not being critical of it.
So,
what I'm saying is that I would like to have more options
yes,
for
but
men.
you can't have more options, can you?
Of course
Well, sure
you
you
can.
could. Think of a male pill. Think of the pill, but for men. Like that
right.
levels
Well,
the playing field. The man can now have sex with a woman without having to worry whether she's using contraception or not, or whether she approves of a certain contraceptive method.
I
right?
understand. I understand now where you're coming from. Yes,
Right.
that would
Now,
be fine.
so
but
one option that
but I don't understand why you're being critical about that. Yeah, I'm sure a male
I'm
pill
not
probably
being
will.
critical about it. I'm saying that as a man who is interested in reproductive rights, what I would like to see is more options for men. This is not a criticism of the options that are available to women. I'm praising the fact that women have these options, and I would also like men to have more options. Now, one option that is currently under development by a little not-for-profit company called the Parsmas Foundation is a product called Vassal Gel. And essentially what this gel is it's kind of like a reversible vasectomy. You go into the doctor, they make a small incision in your scrotum, they inject both of your tubes with a gel. This gel is, as far as we can tell, 100% effective in destroying sperm before it comes out. Now, the nice thing about this is it lasts 10 years or more, as far as we know, because it's still in research. And at any point that you want it reversed, all they do is they inject it with what is essentially water and baking soda. This substance disintegrates, and you go back to being fully fertile. This would be a long-term, discrete means of contraception. And this is something that I would promote for men to have. So this is not a criticism of women. This is saying, hey, as men, one of the things in our current society that I would like to see more of, when women were able to control their fertility, whole worlds and avenues opened up for them. I would like for men also to have these opportunities so that when it is time to have children, they're choosing to have children and not praying that, one, that they don't have an accident, two, that the woman is actually on the pill. He can take responsibility for his own fertility without having to depend upon another, because we know that having children is at a minimum an 18-year-old is an 18-year-long commitment, and it's a very deep commitment. It seems to me that if men could control their fertility, we would have far fewer unwanted children, and the children that we would have by choice would be significantly more loved, more prepared for. These are advantages that I would like to see men have today in this year 2015 in this wonderful technological world of ours. It is not an option that is yet available. One thing that men's activists can work towards is this, and a simple way is to fund the research for this by helping out the Parsmas Foundation.
Could I speak to this?
Mm.
One of the concerns that Francis has and others in the movement have, and I know this from having had discussions with Francis, is that technological differences with respect to reproductive control, that's a difference that makes a difference to how men and women relate to one another.
Yes.
If you think back to the time when women didn't have the pill, I mean, think about why we call it the pill. The pill. There's no other medication we call the pill. We don't talk about the shot. right? Or anything like that, right? Or the serum, the pill. Why would the pill? What was so significant about this? This was something that freed women up from a kind of reproductive slavery. Women basically had to choose either keep their knees together and deny their husbands sex and themselves sex in order
Abstinence.
to right, that absence. They had very, very few options. Okay, and a lot of women, just like a lot of men, do not like condoms. I mean, I was with a woman who, she didn't want me to wear a condom. Right? She didn't like them. I wasn't crazy about them either. Right? Uh, so I mean, it's very facile to say, "Oh, well, just put on a condom." Well, yeah, that's okay if both you and your partner are good with that. But sometimes one or both of you are not good with that. So that it's not that quite that simple. But the issue is that when the pill came along, this freed up women in a huge way. I mean, women were no longer beholden to their own biology, and now sex could be literally divorced, uncoupled from the reproductive consequences, right? In a way that never had been before. I mean, it had always been possible to use another contraceptive. It had always been possible to abstain, right? But the pill completely changed the political landscape and women's situation vis-a-vis marriage and sex. For the first time, women could decide when they were going to have children, how many children they were going to have without it compromising their sex lives. That is a difference that made a difference. It was a huge difference. It emancipated women. Now, there's a comparable sort of problem for men now. Uh, I, Men now, because they don't have something like equivalent to the pill, are not able to to to, uh, to to count on fatherhood, decide when they're going to have children and how many, except by having to resort to contraceptive methods that one or the other might not care for, or having to abstain and thus compromising the quality of their sex life and the frequency of their sex life. So this is again a difference that makes a difference. And I mean, Alana will attest to this. We have a friend, a woman who was in a relationship with a man. She desperately wanted children. She sort of felt that her biological clock was ticking and the time was running out. She wanted to have children, and she frankly told us one day that she just lied to her boyfriend and about being on the pill. She just went off the pill so that she could get pregnant. And then, of course, he felt compelled. He had to get married and stuff like that. And he knew that if he didn't, he'd be on the rope anyway. Legally, he'd have to support this child, right? Had he had the pill, he would have been in a position to control this, right? Consequently, he was sort of at her mercy. And he, in fact, ended up marrying her, and ultimately didn't go well. They got divorced. And so, I mean, these are situations that actually happen. So something like the availability of the pill for one sex and not the other actually creates a discrepancy with respect to their the privileges and their rights that they have. A woman can have sex with a man, and she can just choose not to use a contraceptive, and she can choose to have the child. And then in our legal system, the man is now beholden, even though he doesn't want to have the child, to support that child for 18 years. He is literally at her mercy if she decides to have the child or not have the child. If she decides to not have the child, he has no say, right? I mean, and that's as it should be. No man should be allowed to require a woman to carry a child to term and rear children if she doesn't want to. But why is a woman allowed to require that of a man, right? And the traditional answer is, well, just don't put your dick there if you're not willing to run that risk, okay? But that is a facile answer. I mean, that is the answer that was always given to women in the past before we had the pill and we had effective contraceptives. You don't want to have 9 children by the time you're 35. Don't have so much sex with your husband. That is not a good answer to this problem. So that's the kind of thing that Frances is talking about. And I mean, if you watch videos by Girl Writes What, that was her former handle. She's now goes by her real name, Karen Strawn. She's a YouTuber and a blogger. Makes excellent videos that I would recommend to you. She did a 4-part video series a couple of years ago on, am I getting this right? Legal paternal surrender. Is that what it's called?
That's correct.
Yeah, that was so thorough on this particular problem. We're so used to thinking, especially if we're liberals, thinking that, well, if a if a man impregnates a woman, then she gets to unilaterally decide for the man whether or not he's going to be a father and what his legal and economic responsibilities are going to be, possibly for the rest of his life or for much of his life. And she gets to decide this unilaterally. Why is this just? How exactly is this fair? I mean, watch her videos, I think, and you'll sort of come away thinking, oh, maybe it's not quite so clear cut as I thought. As just keep your dick in your pants, keep the zipper up, and then the problem goes away. It's not quite so simple as that. Given that that there's this gender imbalance here, where one person, by virtue of how our laws are enacted, and by virtue of reproductive technology, is allowed to decide the economic and legal fate of another person.
That's exactly right. Well, first of all,
And I've just
again,
realised I just realised I was muted on. I'm terribly sorry. I was muted on Vaughan. Let me just quickly reiterate the question. Do you identify that what Ozzy has just said, Francis? And if so, what do you consider to be the solution, save for male contraception? But when you have this conflict situation between a woman who has become pregnant by let's use the loose term, a reluctant father.
I think there's two things. One, again, Ozzy said everything that I tried to say 1,000 times more eloquently than I could have. Second of all,
He does that to me all the time. It really irritates me.
I know. Second of all, I think you're jumping the gun. You've missed a whole bunch of steps in your question. So yes, everything that Ozzy has pointed to agrees completely with my point of view. Now, before you start talking about pregnancy, well, let's look at before pregnancy. Let's think in terms of controlling.
Francis, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I kind of thought we'd done that. I'm addressing now the issue when a woman is pregnant, and what rights does a father have, or what rights would you like to see a father having in that situation?
All right, here's what I would like to see. Until such time as we have this discrete means of controlling our fertility available to us, I would like to see something implemented in law. Now, the reason I jumped on fertility right off the bat, one is because it's a core issue that affects everything, just about everything. And it is also likely to be faster than taking the legal route. What I would like to see, so we now have a situation where a woman is pregnant. As Ozzy points out, a man has no right to say, well, no, you will carry this child and you have no choice in the matter. That is not respecting her bodily integrity. It's not respectful of her rights. This is just one of these biological realities that men must deal with. Now, she has a variety of choices. She can keep the child, or she can terminate the pregnancy. But if she does choose to go through with the pregnancy, here's some things that I'd like to see enacted. Right at birth, or before you go in, you ask the woman, do you know who the father is? Can you name him?
Assume for these purposes, yes.
Okay, so then at this point what you would do is you would put the man's name on a record. This man would be approached and say, such and such has informed us that you are potentially the parent, the father of this child.
Assume that's happened. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so at this point, what I would like to see is for a paternity test to be done on the spot to verify whether she's in error or whether she's not.
Assume it's done and paternity is proved.
Okay, so paternity. So we got two choices. One, if paternity is proved, because the man has no control over the process on her end, he should have, in my opinion, the right to choose whether or not he accepts the role the parental role of fathership and the duties that accompany it. So when he would be approached going, yes, I agree that I am the father of this child. I'm willing to take on the responsibilities and the obligations to this child and for whatever period of time is appropriate to the mother. But he also might have the choice to say, you know what, I'm 21 years old. I had no choice. She did not tell me. She told me I was on the pill. I want nothing to do with this child. And that he would have the right to not have these obligations and duties imposed upon him. However, that carries the consequence of, if you do that, you get nothing to do with the child. You have no rights over the child. You cannot turn around 5, 10, 15 years later and regret and go, I really wish I had raised the child. The minute you abandon your paternal obligations and duties, you're just not part of it. If you want to get back into the kid's life later, then it's called adoption or whatever. I haven't really thought through that little bit. So he should have the choice whether or not he engages in parental duties.
Ilana.
And that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, thank you. So you're saying that the woman has to wait until after she has the child to find out if the man's going to take part in the rearing of the child? That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, she does have the opportunity to do it prenatally. That is an option that's available to her. But the downside to that to her is that it is invasive.
You're putting the woman in a position where she has to gamble.
Much as men do currently.
Yeah, every man goes through that gamble every time he has sex with a woman, and
there seems to me that there's another way that would take that out of the. I mean, if
she can have an abortion.
Well,
she
no,
can have
I
an
mean,
abortion too.
A woman on finding out she's pregnant could tell the guy who she believes is the father, and then just have something. If the guy says yes, I'm willing to have this child with you, then you just, I don't know, do some legal document or something, and then it's taken care of.
Parental acceptance. Right,
sure.
Right, I know, but you don't.
But waiting.
Right, but waiting until after the baby's born, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, you can also do prepartum paternity tests. Not all paternity tests are postpartum. I would want, at a minimum, a postpartum. The correct thing for adults to do would be to communicate ahead of time and for both to think about what they're doing, to plan. But do we know human beings to be this way? We generally accept that we're monkeys and we don't think ahead and we fall into the throes of passion. Seems to me that the correct way to handle this would be to have adult conversations before you have sex, during you're having sex, after you're having sex, that you know what you're engaged in. But we know that this is not what the real world is like.
Yeah, but
so,
this is my problem, Francis. You seem to be advocating something, and what's I guess sort of like accepting that the real world doesn't function in the way that a lot of us would hope it would.
Mm-hmm.
But, the resolutions that you're suggesting seem to me to be not being in the real world either. I guess it's because I find it somewhat distasteful that this choice of whether you're a father or not seems to be something that you sort of like put down to a legal document, and I don't know. There's something, and I'm not expressing myself particularly well, and I'm acutely aware of that.
So is that argumentum ad ickiness?
Ad what?
Argumentum ad ickiness?
Yes.
It makes me feel uncomfortable, therefore no.
Yeah, well, at this stage it is.
Provide me with something concrete to work with.
I fully accept that it is ickiness, and I fully accept that I haven't been able to articulate it particularly well. But there is something icky about it. There's something I feel uncomfortable about, and I accept.
Is it a new idea
in a few
for you?
minutes' time, I will do, but maybe Ilana will bail me out of this position.
Well, I'm actually in agreement with the men's rights movement on this topic. I think that men are being forced to have way more responsibilities than the amount of rights that they have makes sense for. But waiting until after the baby's born, that's just going to create a situation where women are going to want to have a lot of abortions because they're not going to feel safe that there's going to be someone to pay for half the raising of a child, and you're going to end up with a lot more abortions than I think you actually need. But yeah, no, I think in the end, to make this fair, the only way is to put some legalistic aspect to it. But I think a way that makes sense for me, Francis, would be as soon as the woman finds out she's pregnant, works something out with the guy she believes is the father, and then the paternity test can happen after. I mean, you can work out a document that says, assuming obviously that you're actually the father, right? So you don't have to have this invasive procedure in order to have the whole thing determined at 2 months, after pregnancy, right, has begun.
I don't want to get lost in the means. What I want to pay attention to is the principle here. And the principle is this, that two adults have the choice. Two adults have choice to engage in sex. Two adults have the choice to communicate. We understand that people lie. We understand that people are irresponsible. We understand that some are responsible and some are very honest. But we understand that we're monkeys and we're self-interested, selfish little creatures amongst many other attributes. It is necessary, if we're going to, look, if we're going to protect women, we must equally protect men. If we're going to give women certain choices, men must have equivalent choices. And the choice boils down to, am I willing to, for a woman, the choice boils down to, am I willing to go through the gestation period and give birth to a child and raise it for X amount of time? These are the choices that she has to make. He has the choice. He does not have a choice as to whether she is pregnant, gestates, or not. Yet he should, and he should have the right after the fact to decide whether or not he has that. Now, how the actual mechanics of that work, I believe, boil down to two things. One, a form of agreement somehow that is binding, and all legalisms considered. And two, evidence that the claim of paternity is appropriately assigned. So this way, because consider another way if you don't do a paternity test. A woman walks up to a man and says, honey, I'm pregnant and you're the dad. But he isn't. If there is no evidential, if there's no evidential backing of that, he is basically, we're in the very same situation that we're in right now. We have to rely on the woman's word as to who the father is. So now some guys might be great with that. Go, hey, this is the drummer's kid. Great, I'm happy to raise the milkman's child because I love you. Well, that's a choice you get to make. But I would like to see it empirically based. I'd like to see some real test that says, 99% accuracy, you are not the father or you are the father. And at that point, at what it does, now one of the arguments is people go, well, then, you're teaching people to distrust each other. I see it the other way around. Human beings need consequences to their actions. Otherwise, if there are no consequences, we will just do willy-nilly what we can get away with as a species. I think that if everyone understands that there are consequences, that there will be hard tests, that there is a judicial system out there to protect men's rights as much as there is to protect women's rights, then what we'll find is probably women will think more carefully about who they're with. They'll take less risks. There might be less abortions. I don't know. I don't know if we're about to more or less abortions. I have no way of calculating that. But the point being that if we have a structure that if men and women are morally equivalent and we have the same status, should we not have the same rights to support the obligations that are forced upon us? And do we not have the choice to accept or reject an obligation? And Right now, women have these choices. They can choose the obligation of parenthood or not. Men do not. I would like for both of us to equally, presuming that there is no that there's no fertility control for men yet. I would at least in law like to see this be a global option. I think that one of the benefits too is you'd have a lot less 20-year-old fathers, and you'd have a heck of a lot more mature fathers who are ready to be in their children's lives, who want to be, who are invested in being, because they had to actually take the step of reversing their fertility control to allow themselves to become fertile. And thus, the children who come into the world would be wanted, desired, as opposed to accidents.
I actually agree with you and the men's rights movement on this, but I don't think that. I mean, I think it's quite obvious that it's definitely going to lead to more abortions and possibly more single mothers too. I mean, it has to, right?
Well,
I mean, if,
why?
well,
Not
because
if
I
men can
mean,
control it. Well, if men can control their fertility, no.
well, no. I'm assuming that we're just talking about legal
Right, right,
parental surrender here, right? I mean,
right.
if it, you're taking out all the men who are now trapped, right? And saying that they no longer have to be fathers. So that's always going to lead to a situation of either a single mother in that case or an abortion in that case, right?
Can I
So
interject on this though? If a man isn't the father, she's not entitled to support from him. I would
no,
argue,
I'm not. No,
right?
I'm not
So,
saying
right?
that. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying I agree with it, but I don't think that we should pretend that it's not going to lead to one of those two things. It
This
has
No,
is
to.
but
the
no, but
men.
no, but that's. But see, here's how I see it. Like you get, oh, there's going to be this tragedy. You know, if we were to change the laws so that men were not obligated to support children when it wasn't demonstrated that they're the fathers. There's, what's going to happen is you'll have women who are forced to be single mothers or else have to make the painful choice of having an abortion, right? That's an undesirable outcome. But we already have an undesirable outcome.
That's what I was saying.
Men in untold numbers who, oh, maybe I misunderstood, but men in untold
I was just
numbers.
making that very
Yeah.
point. I was
Oh, I
just
beg
saying
your
let's
pardon. I
not.
thought you were making the opposite.
I, no, I
I'm
was just
sorry.
saying let's not pretend that that isn't going to be the outcome. I was saying I agree
Right.
that. Okay, right.
Oh,
Well,
My mistake.
we've caused Canadian domestic unharmony here.
Oh
Which
no.
is no,
We've been
that
arguing
can't
like this for
happen.
28 years, so.
No, you're not
well,
old enough to have been arguing that long.
Yes.
Can
No,
I
it's
just remind people?
28 years.
Okay. We're coming up to 30 minutes to go, and what I'm minded to do is to bring in a guest caller, and because it's going to upset all the sync on the video display, if there is anyone else that wants to join us, please send a contact request to me now on Skype. It's Magic Sandwich Show, and we'll get you all on at the same time. Otherwise, we're just going to get. And Mitch, if you could just confirm that you still want, you're still here and you still want to be on, that'd be great. If I click on your contact request, it's going to make everyone disappear and could make things. Oh, we've got Mr. Jim. I'm not sure you're the same person. I don't know. I don't know how to deal with this. It is. Okay. In that case, what I'm going to do is close down everything on this screen and join him into the call and start things up again. I will put everything on mute so you can talk privately amongst yourselves, people. And hopefully we'll be back in a few moments' time. sorry about that, everyone. But when we get a caller in, I've got to rejig everything. Hopefully, we're back live and people can hear us. Yeah? Give me one yes, and we'll get started again. Yes, there we go.
Yes.
Mitch Morland, welcome to the show. Okay, there we've got a technical fault. All right, Mitch, we can see you. Can you hear us? Nod. Yes, okay. We can't hear you. Okay, there's something you need to do on your sound at your end. Talk to us. No, that's not working. Okay, whilst you're working that out, Mitch, we'll give you a few moments to sort that out. Who wanted to pick up on anything that's been said so far? Ozzy, come on, you've got to be able to say something. Fill in a few dead moments for us.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Well, all right. We talked about at some length about one issue that's relevant to men's rights. What would be another one that you think is especially important? Or maybe we could talk about.
No, I think that's a very good question.
Okay.
Because
right.
I'm kind of still struggling with getting a handle on the MRA movement. I think the first one, yeah, I can sort of like see where you're coming from with that. But obviously, I think you're right. If we've got, what's your second best option, Francis? Let's deal with that.
What would be the second largest issue that I would deal with, in terms of legal rights or just in terms of cultural rights?
Well, MRA
or cultural.
Rights.
Okay.
What's your second best beef, so to speak?
I would say that having the legal right for a child to be to have his body respected, not circumcised by default at birth, would be another big issue. Again, if you look at a lot of where men's issues stem from, it stems around our bodies. It stems around reproduction. It stems about what you may or may not do to a man's body. And I think this is something that people quite frequently forget, is that very much like women, men have bodies, and we care about our bodies, and we care about the bodies of our boys, and we care about our emotions and our psychological well-being. We have all the same general needs that women do, but very often they're glossed over. And one of the things, if we look at circumcision is generally practiced for one of three reasons. One, because that's just the way it is. Two, because of religious reasons. And three, it's because of, it might be because of some medical need. The cases where circumcision is an actual medical need, although I don't have an exact stat to give you at the moment, is far fewer than just the convention of snipping a boy's genitals. If we look at how the world responded when they learned about female genital mutilation, everyone just lost their mind. And, within 60 seconds of hearing about this, we had petitions and TV shows, and it became a great big issue, and everyone was concerned for the little girls. But for some reason, people don't seem to carry that to the little boys. And from my point of view, there's so many different ways that we can look at circumcision. The way that I would look at it is this just starts off on a basic thing. First of all, why would you mutilate a child's body unless there was no medical condition? A 2-year-old kid has has appendicitis. You operate on the kid. That makes sense. But a 2-year-old does not have appendicitis. You don't go and snip it out just in case. You accept that this is part of their body, and should the need arise, then you will deal with it. I see zero good reason for circumcision, and a number of bad reasons for it. One is cultural pressure. It'll just look nicer. It's sexier. Well, I'm sorry, but this is not a good reason to trim off a piece of someone's body. Fashion, the preference of other females who he has never met, or other males. It is the preference of people that this boy has never met. He's not even pubescent yet, and we're deciding how other people are going to respond to his body. Seems to me, wait until the kid reaches the age of majority, give him the choice. If there is a medical need for it, well, then you want to take care of his health. The boy matters. The boy counts. You know, he's important too, and you gotta treat him that way.
Who would like to respond first on that?
I'd like to make a couple of points, actually. I don't disagree about circumcision generally being unnecessary. But first of all, there is another reason. All over the third world, they're doing it because of HIV. So that would be a fourth reason, right? I mean, and it's being taken very seriously. I mean, a lot of people disagree with it, but that's a big reason right now why people are having circumcisions, or people are giving their children circumcisions, is because of the concern over HIV and AIDS.
And the belief that circumcision will make a difference.
Yes, but there is some evidence for it. It's not without evidence, right?
I think that's really in dispute. Now, it
might be. I'm just bringing up a fourth point.
I can't argue the AIDS thing, but yeah.
Okay, the second point is the way you phrased it made it sound like the reason why we do it with boys and not with little girls is because we care less about boys. And I would dispute that. I think a lot of it has to do with the age at which little boys are circumcised, and the fact that it happens so quickly and the trauma seems over very quickly, whereas with female genital mutilation, it's something that usually happens when they're much older, and it's a much more severe, painful, unanesthetized ordeal. So I think that there's a reason why people seem to care more about female genital mutilation than they do about male genital mutilation. That doesn't just come down to the fact that we just care less about boys. I think that's a little unfair.
So that's the he won't remember argument, right?
No, but there is that, right? There is the feeling that, well, the little boy, he seems to be over it in about 10 minutes, right? I mean, I've seen circumcisions. That is what people think about them, right? So now I'm not saying there aren't arguments against that. I'm just saying that there's a reason why people worry and are more concerned with female genital mutilations. It does seem to be a more traumatic thing, right? I'm not saying that male genital circumcision is a good thing or that we should be doing it. I'm just making an argument other than we just care less about boys.
Well, I think the question is, why would we think about it even to begin with? I can understand why religious people would want to do this, because they have a tradition going back millions of years, well, a long time. They have holy books that say when you have a little boy at the 8th day, you snip the little sucker off. You know, they have a historical precedent for it. I asked my mother, why did you circumcise me? And her answer was, it was just what we did in those days. The doctor said it should be done, and it should be done. Now, at what point did they ask, well, what about this kid's future? What about this kid's sexual future? These sort of questions, it is my experience, are not typically considered with the same amount of depth as one might for a little girl. Now, right or wrong, it is my experience, it is my instinct, it is my belief that people have a preference for women. They have a greater concern, they have a greater care. This is not universal, and so let's not make this, a black and white issue. But it's my experience that if you hear a woman screaming, everyone rushes to a woman. If you hear a man screaming, people think, oh no, there's danger, let's run away. As opposed to thinking, but why don't we take care of the man? I think this goes all the way down to, I think this goes down to the level of the child. And I believe that these are instincts that are built in us. These are instincts that were useful in a past a long time ago, but are no longer useful in the year 2015. And I think that one of the things that we should do is start reconsidering our emotive, instinctive responses and ask ourselves, broader questions as to the child's rights, as to the child's well-being, as to the child's future. What are the potential complications? Is this genuinely a benefit to him, or does the potential risk outweigh what we think currently are benefits? I think that if we get over this notion of acceptability, and if we responded to boys instinctively the way that we respond to little girls, we would respond with revulsion and horror to having a part of their body cut off. So I would like to see for us to have a greater discussion on these issues, and there are some good discussions. Not incredibly, but what I find interesting is that the strongest arguments I've seen are made by nurses and doctors who go, there is no real medical necessity. And I find that those who make claims such as removing a foreskin reduces the vector for someone getting AIDS to be dubious. But I will admit that I cannot argue that argument in any depth.
I'm acutely aware of the time, and our guest has been waiting patiently, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from him now. Mitch, welcome to the show. Okay, I was incredibly optimistic. I don't think we can hear you. Mitch, if you go to the tools box in your Skype call, hopefully you'll get a drop-down menu. So is it... tools, options, and audio settings. By doing that, you should be able to then pick out a microphone, which may be able to help us hear you. Have you got that? Nod if you can hear me, and yeah. Okay, tools, options, audio settings. Yeah, and we're not getting anything. Oh, that's a shame. But we can see you. I don't know whether you can
Perhaps
sign or
Americans-
whatever, but
ask him to type his question in the chat, and we'll see if we can address it that way.
yeah, we can do that.
His question or his comment.
You can also do it in Skype, so it's not lost. You can chat in Skype, yeah. Let's see where we get with that.
I had a comment, if I may.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
Okay, it goes to the larger point that Francis was raising about the how we evaluate men in danger, men in peril, men suffering with respect to compared to women, right? I mean, everyone is rightly outraged and upset and disturbed by the thought of women being raped by men. But I mean, our prisons are full of people where men are getting raped. I mean, right now there are probably hundreds of men getting raped in prison, right? Conservatively, hundreds of men are getting raped right now in prisons. I mean, it's no laughing matter. I'm sort of laughing at it because it's almost ridiculous to have to say something like this. But men get raped routinely in prisons. It's such a commonplace thing. Very little is done about it. It's almost used as a method of control there. People just look the other way. Now, we don't seem particularly outraged. Why? Well, first of all, it's happening to men, I think, and it's happening to bad people, and it's being done by other bad people. And so we sort of look the other way, right? But I think Francis is onto something when he talks about how we treat men's lives differently than women's lives, right? The very idea that women will go into combat and they could be beat up and killed and raped just makes us think, oh my goodness, there's something really horrible about asking women to go into combat, right? Something rankles. There's that ickiness factor, right? That just seems horrific, right? But we don't think that about men, and yet, of course, men do go into to combat. They get terrified, they get traumatized, they get destroyed, they get their bodies wrecked routinely, and they get raped. I mean, one of the things that goes on in combat situations where people get taken prisoner is they often are raped. They are as part of ritual act of humiliation. You only have to look at something like Abu Ghraib, what's happening there, and people being degraded, sodomized with objects, right, and photographed, and not just by men, also by women, actually. This kind of thing goes on. We're much less concerned about that kind of thing. Or consider the body count, the number of men that participate in occupations that are absolutely deadly, right? And we just don't think anything of it, right? There are some occupations that are really, really deadly, where women don't apply. Women, aren't particularly interested, and we would not particularly like to see women operating in certain capacities. We would feel a little bit squeamish about it, but we don't think anything about this. And I think it's because we do have this attitude, perhaps culturally indoctrinated into us, but also I think perhaps as a function of our biological heritage and a disposition to see men suffering differently than women suffering. And I think that there might be something about women that, when we see them suffer or think about them suffering, affects us a little bit more deeply. That might be part of our biological nature. That might be part of our psychological inheritance. And this could express itself culturally in a kind of lack of concern for men's suffering and deaths and things like that, compared to women. And if that's true, then that means that there's something either in our culture or in our biology or both, and so some complex interaction between the two, that results in a kind of systematic inequality of how men are treated and valued in our society. And it seems to me that this is something that should be on the radar. And it seems to me that anyone who's concerned with equality, anyone who's an egalitarian, should actually be concerned about that, whether they're a feminist or a men's rights activist, right? But I mean, to suggest something like this in some quarters is tantamount to I don't know how to describe it. I mean, there are people who will bristle at the very suggestion, right? I mean, I've had conversations with feminists where a suggestion like that is seen as outrageous. How dare you suggest that we live in a world where men's suffering, men's pains, and men's death is treated less seriously than women? But why would you sort of bristle at that? Why would that seem so outrageous? Unless perhaps you're committed to the idea that no, there's a victim class and there's an oppressor class, and these two can't. This picture is incompatible with the idea that perhaps actually we don't value men as much as we think.
I'm going to pause you there because hopefully Francis has been able to see the message that was posted in the Skype chat from Mitch, who, again, if you want to try and speak, Mitch, let's just check whether you've got any audio. No, you haven't. Francis, he's posted a comment in the Skype chat. People on Vaughan won't see it. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Can I invite you? Can I invite you to read it? Because, as I say, people on Vaughan won't see it. Can I invite you to read it out and then respond to it? Thank you.
Okay. So he left a comment. Forgive me. He left a comment saying Francis is confusing two issues regarding child support. The one issue is who gets to determine if a child is going to be born. We all agree that this is ultimately the woman's decision. However, once that decision is made, both parents have an equal obligation to financially support the child. If the mother doesn't want to care for the child, then the child goes to the father. The mother pays for the support. Or if the mother makes more money, she pays the support. In this entire discussion, I did not hear what the child has the right to. Two parents financially supporting him or her. My first response is focusing on the child is actually an excellent way to go. It's something that often gets overlooked in the conversation because we're focused on the cause of a child coming into being. The second thing is that you say both parents have an equal obligation to financially support the child. I don't agree with that. I believe that the child has the right to be supported mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, so that its needs are met, whether it be by the mother or by the father. But at some point, an agreement has to be made. Obligations aren't just doled out willy-nilly, just flip a coin, you get it. No, this time you're responsible. Obligations, the fact that there's a child involved does not remove the fact that both parents also have rights and obligations. And yes, if a child is born, I believe the child has right. The question is, who will fulfill that obligation? If, for example, and I don't want to sound polemic, but I'm kind of going to use extreme examples. If, for example, we'll start off with the easy one, both parents decide we're going to raise a child, that's great. Let's say that one parent is very wealthy and the other is not. We can see why a parent who would accept the obligation would want to be the one who is the primary financial aid giver to the child. But what if you get a case where a woman has duped a man into pregnancy, or that the child is not even his? Why is he automatically assigned? First of all, it assumes that let us assume that we are talking about the two biological parents, and we know this to be a truth. Why is the man necessarily obligated to spend 18 years or more of his life taking care of this child if it was not his decision? And I see no good reason for this. I believe that both parents should have a choice. The woman does have a variety of choices. She can terminate the pregnancy. Once the pregnancy is done, she has the option of adopting. There are some municipalities, states, provinces, areas of the world where they have something they colloquially referred to as the Baby Moses Law. That is to abandon one's obligation and to shift it onto the state. So if these options are available to her and we consider this to be acceptable, why would these options not simultaneously be available to the father? Now, if the mother wants to take care of the child, great. But the father only has an obligation if he has accepted the obligation, in the same way that the mother only has the obligation if she has accepted the obligation. You cannot force obligations onto people that I'm aware of.
Or rather, you shouldn't. I mean, we have a legal system right now where in some jurisdictions, a woman doesn't have to establish that a man is the father. She just has to declare who the father is. I mean, there are literally jurisdictions where a woman can just write down the name of a man, state that he's the father, and he's on the hook.
This is how it's done in Canada.
Yeah, and there have been cases where men have established biologically, I'm not the father. Too bad.
Yeah.
What is going on with our legal system, right?
Whoa, 1 second. Run that by me again, Ozzy. A woman can simply claim that someone is the father.
Yes.
And
yes, a woman when she goes to hospital and delivers a baby has to declare who the father is, right? When they do the birth certificate, they have to fill. There's this blank, right? And they have to put a name in there if they can, right? Now, a woman doesn't have to. She can say, "I don't know who the father is," right? But invariably,
that's my first concern over it. So they don't have to, because it may
they
don't know. So okay,
right? Yeah, but if she thinks she knows, right? Yes. She puts down the person that she thinks it is. That person is now on the hook, whether she's right or wrong. That person is legally on the hook to support that child. And
actually,
go ahead, Francis.
Hang on. Let's pause there. Legally on the hook, meaning what? That
financially responsible as the father.
Legally presumed to be the father.
And financially responsible. Yes.
And how does he go about disproving the fact that he's the father.
With difficulty. You have to go to
Right.
court, and you have to hope that. Well, go ahead, Francis. Francis actually knows more about this than I do, but I know of cases. Go ahead, Francis.
Actually, I just finished speaking to the appropriate people about this matter about 3 weeks ago. The way that it works is the child comes in, the child is born, the mother is given forms. Now, in the United States, they who declare paternity or parenthood first are the ones who win. So the first one to the first one to fill out the paperwork in a hospital in the United States, at least in the state of New York, because I only spoke to one association in New York. In New York, the first one to fill the paperwork out is the one who's right. In Canada, the way it works is you are born and you are given government papers. These government papers are necessary to fill out a certification of birth. We certify that this child was born. This can be filled out either by the man or the woman upon which the man is named. Now, the man does not need to be informed that this certificate was filled out with his name. However, once he discovers this to be the case, his option is to either do nothing. By default, he is assumed to be assigned parental obligations, or if he does choose to not, if he can choose to dispute it in court. And very frequently, what happens, far too frequently, what happens is the court says, look, much like our friend's argument here, look, there's a baby involved, you're responsible whether you like it or not. This is the practical outcome in very, very, very many cases. So one, the man is not necessarily informed that he's been named as the father, because there are privacy laws that says that the Registrar General cannot just contact somebody out of the blue and go, hey, guess what, we've been told you're a father. So if a certain period of time passes by, he doesn't know anything about it, the woman decides, okay, well, now it's time for me to get some child support. I've had this document for 3 years. His name's on it. He's never contested it. Never mind that he never knew about it. May I ask the state to support me in extracting child support from this man? I'm done.
I think that
unfortunately, I don't think Mitch is, and I feel so sorry for him because he's trying to contribute by text message. Ilana, I interrupted you, but whilst you have your say, Ilana, perhaps Francis can look at the comments that Mitch is making.
Okay, he might have a hard time listening to me and looking at the comments at the same time, but I was just going to say, I think that part of what Mitch's point is nobody wants to see a situation where a child only has less support than he would have if he had two parents. And I think, although I agree again with you, Francis, and with the MRA's position on this in general, I think that it's going to be a very, very difficult road, because I think the state has the same concerns that the child needs to have the support of two parents, and if one parent opts out, then that support is going to have to come from the state, or the child is going to have to go without. So I just think it's one of those issues that's going to be really, really hard to resolve in a positive way.
I understand, and I'm kind of caught between listening to what you're saying and actually reading what I consider to be very thoughtful comments. So if we, I'll pick up where he left. His last comment, his previous comment was, you can waive every one of those parental rights and obligations except so you can waive all the rights and obligations except that of financially supporting the child. Because we as a society have determined that the best interests of the child trump the dupe's father's interest. I think that's something really worth considering a little more profoundly. The same holds true for the guy who puts a hole in the condom. If the baby is born, the mother must support the child. That is, yeah, that would be That would be a form of fraud, not paternity fraud, maternity fraud, I imagine. I've been doing domestic relation law for 20 years and have never seen this happen. I'd like to know what you've never seen happen. If you can clarify that for me, it would be helpful. This is not what happens. He is alleged, and the DNA test is ordered. If he refuses it, he gets a support order, meaning that assuming that what this means is that he's informed by the state that he has the obligation to pay. If he does a DNA test and is proven not to be the father, he doesn't get the support order. And I'd like to know also, where is this? Are we talking Canada? Are we talking about the States? As for the hole in the condom objection, yes. a woman doesn't have to have the child.
That's the woman me. That was me saying that.
Sorry. So now we've got like multiple threads of conversation going on. Okay, so then you're responding to Mitch, and okay, so you guys are having conversation in a completely hidden channel. You're the dark voices whispering on the internet.
On that note, how dare you? But seriously, we're up to our 2 hours. I think it's been an incredibly interesting conversation. I think it would have been much more interesting had Mitch been able to get his
I really regret that.
But these are issues we can come to on a future show. But I did say at the get-go, this is going to be 2 hours and no longer. I suspect it's already a little bit longer. But can I thank everyone that's been involved? I know that everyone's going to have final comments, and I will come to you all in due course. But just to remind people, this will be uploaded, hopefully within the next 24 hours, onto the Magic Sandwich Show YouTube channel. And hopefully, next time we get someone on, we'll be able to sort out the audio. But thank you, Mitch, for your contribution. Also, Mitch, thank you to Francis, Ilana, and Ozzy. And as I said, I will give you the opportunity for last words. And I don't know, Francis, I think that you've been very eloquent. I think you've been very persuasive in some regards. But maybe this is something we're going to have to come back to, because I don't know why. I don't know whether it's the itchiness that you described. I don't know whether it's because I struggle with not identifying myself as a feminist, and I'm not sure that I fully understand what you're identifying. Well, maybe not even you, but other people are identifying as men's rights activism. I don't know. I think it's very interesting. I came here with literally a blank canvas. I've listened to a lot. I've learnt a lot. I'll go away and think about it. But thank you very much for your contribution. And if there are any final words that you want to give, maybe to me or the audience, please do so.
So who are we starting with, me?
Yeah, that was directed at you.
Okay. Well, I hope that I brought some distinctions and that we've touched some of the issues in depth. The essential element to take behind all of this is that the men's movement in general, including its subparts, are essentially interested in what most of us would call egalitarianism. That is, we're seeking to have impartiality under law and fairness in culture. Sometimes that means that we must reevaluate our habits, our old ways of doing things, our instincts. And I would like to encourage people to carry this conversation forth in as thoughtful a way as they can and really discuss the issue. I'd like to see more of this discussion. And if anyone has specific questions or if they have specific arguments or objections, go to my Google Plus page. It's Francis Roy, CA, I think. Just search for me on it, and I'd be happy to address the issues there.
Hey, Francis, just send me a link. I'll put it in the description of the video.
Okay, yeah. And I'd like to thank Mitch for what could have been a really potentially interesting conversation. I invite you to contact me. I'd like to thank you for hosting me, and of course for the wonderful company of Lana and Ozzy. It's always a pleasure.
It is indeed. Thank you. Ozzy, final few comments. And whilst you do this, Mitch, I know that you're handicapped because you can't actually be heard, but if you've got any last comments, start typing them now, and we'll read them out before the show. But Ozzy.
Okay. Well, Mitch has already started his comment. He's written my final comment 4 score and 7 years ago. So, he's in the spirit. Okay. My final comment would be this: if you're interested in the question of legal paternal surrender that we've been discussing, there's an excellent 4-part video series. They're not very long, by Girl Writes What. Her name is Karen Straughan, Straughan, Karen Straughan, aka Girl Writes What. Just Google Girl Writes What, you'll find her. And look for videos called LPS 1, LPS 2, LPS 3, or Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4 on legal paternal surrender. They're very interesting. They're very thought provoking. They're the kind of thing that will, even if you think you're very, very firmly convinced on the issue, I think it will give you pause. And if you still hold the same opinion, you're going to have to do a bit of work to counter some of the objections that she raised. It certainly gave me pause. And with respect to the whole issue of men's rights, there was some comments in the live side chat that I thought were very illuminating. There were a couple of people there who posted things like "men's rights, LOL," and what more rights do men have or need? Now, this is kind of interesting because the presumption there is that everything is hunky dory for men, right? That is such a dismissive view that no, there can't possibly be some area of our society where men are, with respect to women, at some kind of disadvantage, right? It seems to me you have to have not looked at the world and not thought about it, and you have to be absolutely in the grips of an ideology to think that men have all the rights that they are entitled to and that they want for none. That seems to me to be completely in the grips of an ideology to express something like that. So I hope that people will think about these things. That does not follow that just because one group has historically and traditionally been seen as disadvantaged with respect to another, that the group that has been seen as in a position of greater advantage is in a position of greater advantage across the board and suffers no disadvantages. Or that even that if you think that women are at some greater disadvantage than men, that we can't possibly address the issues of concern to men and injustices against men until we've solved every problem that is of concern to women. That seems to me to be absolutely in the grips of ideology. That is the sort of the ideological feminism that I think that Francis is concerned about, and it's something that concerns me as well. And I'm not a men's rights activist.
I am a feminist, under my definition. Anyway, on that bombshell, I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back.
Wait.
What?
Ilana, final word.
Oh, I don't need it. No, it's okay. I don't need one.
I'm just so sexy.
You didn't start her. You didn't finish her. What's wrong?
Actually, I don't have very much to add. I mean, I have a few disagreements with certain elements of the MRM, but I don't have any disagreements with any of the subjects that you brought up today on reproductive rights and custody, divorce, things in that realm. I think that men really do have issues, and I think they need to be addressed. I don't have anything else to say.
Yeah, don't go on, woman.
Oh dear.
On that bombshell. Please, everyone, stay on the call. I'm just going to end it as a live broadcast. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time.